Cartoon Network's attitude during what is now known as its powerhouse era was that of a high-octane, living, breathing animation factory. The cartoons of this period generally had to stick out through their looks and jokes and how much old-school toony shenanigans they could fit into 11 minutes. This is an attitude that persists into their modern output, but something switched around the middle of that powerhouse period that would eventually change the way they're presented, planting the seeds for more high-stakes, emotion-heavy animated stories that were aimed at kids and adults 50-50. This was in the form of a groundbreaking show known as Samurai Jack. A show like this is generally not my area of expertise or where my interests lie. Deep, heavy, long-winded epics aren't able to hold my interest for very long, with only a couple mass appeal exceptions. But there was just something about Samurai Jack that held my interest. That something being the gorgeous animation, but there's a lot more to this show than that. Like with a lot of these pseudo-retro cartoons, I have to stress that this was before my time. I was born during the show's first season, and you can't really show what's happening here to a 2-year-old and expect them to fully grasp its intricacies. But a 17-year-old, absolutely. I really liked what I got from Samurai Jack, but let's get back to the past, as in prior to getting back to the past. The show was created by Genndy Tartakosvky, one of the most talented artists of the modern era, let's be modest here. Much like Craig McCracken, he was one of the fresh-faced cartoonists that Hanna-Barbera let run rampant in their studio during the early 90s, and also got his big break with a short on the What a Cartoon anthology series. His first show came out of that in 1995, Dexter's Laboratory, a science fiction comedy about a stubborn young boy with a massive underground lab and experiments in robot suits up the yowza. When it got turned into its own show in 1996, it became Cartoon Network's first homegrown breadwinner. But this video isn't about Dexter's Lab. Tartakovsky put the show down in 1999 and went to work on another series that was far less silly and wacky. He went back to his own childhood for this one, remembering his fascination with samurai culture and his dreams of fighting in a post-apocalyptic world with his crush. Remember the crush part, I think that'll be important. After assembling a new team and giving them a videotape with a marker reading good cinematography as inspiration, Samurai Jack was first broadcast on the 10th of August 2001, with a 3-part TV movie that also functioned as the show's first 3 episodes. While it's difficult to get ratings for early 2000s Cartoon Network, it's safe to assume it started strong but never stayed quite as popular as the Powerpuff Girls or Next Episode. But what it had over those shows was universal critical acclaim, earning several Emmys and Annies and being a genuinely respected piece of animation. Despite this, it ended its initial run on September 25th, 2004 at 4 seasons and 52 episodes. You can't have too much of a good thing, I guess. Looking at this 52 episode run in retrospect, I wholeheartedly agree with the critical consensus. It is a wonderful show, and here's the nuts and bolts of why that is. The premiere movie kicks off in an alternate ancient Japan, where a monstrous shapeshifter, Aku, wreaks havoc and chaos once more after a long banishment. The king dies and the prince is sent across the world to train for about 20 years. Good thing Aku doesn't screw up the whole world during that time. He then comes back as a samurai to face Aku using a sword and some justice and peace and whatever. When the battle's almost over, Aku sends the prince to the distant future where now he's screwed up the whole world. The samurai prince, now known as Jack, has to deal with the shape-shifting demon's antics, severe culture shock, enemies he couldn't have imagined, and he has to find a portal that's gonna take you back to the past. I know I'm kind of butchering the first half of the premiere movie. Aku's narration throughout most of the series run is legendary, and does a better job at setting the mood. But I have to say, this setup is really good. We've got a clear-cut protagonist, antagonist, and main goal to keep watching the show for. Unfortunately, Jack doesn't make it back to his own time during the classic series run. He's stuck in a dystopian future. And despite the grand nature of all this, most of the show is episodic. There are a couple of recurring characters I'll get to in a moment, but you're almost always guaranteed a new location and a new atmosphere in each episode. I think that's why it's easy for someone like me to get into. It's never like you're stuck in one place. Jack travels the globe for a way back, and his struggle is engaging on many levels. I think it's best we segue into characters now, and there aren't that many, funnily enough. You've got Samurai Jack himself, who's this respectable mix of strong and calm, physically well built and pretty hot to be honest. It's no surprise he can take out whole robot armies in the span of minutes. His main weakness to himself is his personality. It's easy for his strength to be clouded by his peaceful, collected conscience, like most of the best warriors have. He's not exactly stoic, but the fact that he's a samurai fighting robots should tell you that he's out of his element. Then you've got God's gift to evil, Aku, one of the best villains in animation history. He was essentially created to cause misery and destruction, but he has a straight sense of humor about it all. Love to hate they call it, and Aku's such a trollish little pest to Jack that you can't help but egg him on just a little. I mean, the less chance Jack has of getting back, the more episodes we get, right? But sadly, he only has about 2 or 3 major roles per season. Most of the time he's just this omnipotent force of evil in Jack's foes. But I guess that works in some way, but I really like episodes and scenes that focus on him. He's just that much fun to watch. The third most prevalent character only appears in 4 episodes, and that's the Scotsman, a tough brutish Scot who, after some trouble with Jack on a bridge, surprisingly manages to become his best friend. I like his general design, personality, culture and all that, but it's magical seeing him bond with Jack so easily. It's great juxtaposition. Technically putting aside the talking dogs in the premiere movie, who are a silly and cute indication that we're set in a dark, albeit fantasy-filled future, practically all of Samurai Jack's characters are one-offs. There are still a few that are important to Jack's development, namely the monks in Jack and the Monks, who aren't the best speakers, but remind him what he's fighting for when he almost gives up, and the ancient master's son, who's now a tree, but the only person alive other than Aku who remembers Jack in the past. And Demongo the Soul Collector, I guess, pretty self-explanatory, annoying voice but one of Jack's best adversaries. Not many one-off characters can claim importance to an overall show, but Samurai Jack's a special case where they went for quality over quantity with the cast. Now to talk about how this show is written, and the easy answer to that statement is it isn't. Dialogue is not something the show waves around all willy-nilly. There are a lot of instances where you get whole scenes and montages without a single peep. I don't think there are whole episodes with absolutely zero talking. That'd seem pretty noticeable and forced, but you should know first and foremost about this show that it talks to you through its visuals. So I must warn you, if you're not a big fan of movies and shows that are light on dialogue, Samurai Jack is going to be sluggish at first, if not just unentertaining. However, if you're turned on by fantasy buzzwords like fate and destiny, you may just be sucked into the scope of Samurai Jack alone. The story structures are a careful balance of high stakes and relatively quick delivery. Most of them are told across 20 minutes, which doesn't seem like a lot of time to introduce a locale, its people, a threat, and a way to defeat it, and that's what I respect them for doing 4 dozen times. You're bound to fall deeply in love with at least one of them. But the show isn't always this big serious downer. It has its moments of comedy. I know people are going to disagree with me, but I find the comedy in this show to be distracting, most of the time. They can pull it off with flying colours every once in a while, but especially during the first half of the series, it can come off as too random or too awkward to fully enjoy. To give them some benefit, Jack is more than equipped for comedic situations, especially if they come after some of his darker adventures. Usually the best jokes on the show are the ones where either he or Aku is in on it, so the lesser jokes can come off as annoying when it's just complete zaniness with no basis in anything other than the setting. Okay, now that I've got how I feel about the humour off my chest, back to happy thoughts with the animation. Simply put, it's exquisite. Character design-wise, it draws from the previous Hanna-Barbera-made Cartoon Network shows, then removes the outlines and adds some influence from futuristic genres like dystopia and cyberpunk. This all certainly made it stand out from the pack, but they're complemented well by the backgrounds, all of which are just detailed enough. The typical dominant colours of red and yellow help sell the feel of the adventures, but they're not overbearing, they're drawn basically to match the basic characters. I think Samurai Jack is a great example of a show using the strengths of digital animation. It wouldn't have looked half as good on cells. It always looks crisp and clear, making its Oriental influence all the more eye-popping. And by Oriental, I don't mean it looks like anime, but rather modernized early second millennium Chinese and Japanese paintings. But this is all about what the show looks like. How does it feel? How does it move? Fluidly enough to match the simple yet deep look of things, but it noticeably goes a little faster during the action sequences. And you're likely to get at least one per episode, if not going across a whole episode. Everything about the action in this show works spectacularly. The angles, the choreography, the sound effects, the framing, it all raises the tension to near perfection. I was joking before about the good cinematography videotape, but Genndy and his team did seek influence from 70s cinema to make everything feel bigger and more important. By the way, did you know Star Wars was a 70s movie? You could tell they knew and weren't going to let you forget it easily. Now, despite the show's formula not changing much after the premiere movie, there's still some notable seasonal trends that make some better than others. Season 1 is more focused on giving us new fantasy worlds, but still serves as a good introduction to the darker themes and establishes well what the action is like. But I consider Season 2 to be the weakest of the original run because it's less balanced tonally. The darker and lighter episodes sometimes don't even feel like they're part of the same show. There's more variety, I can say. At least Season 3's a massive improvement and my favourite. They focused more on exploration this time around and developing the locations to their fullest potential. Season 4 then acts like a mix of all the previous seasons with all their pros mashed together. My biggest gripe with Season 4 is that by this point, the slower pacing the show allowed started to get abused by some serious padding issues, but otherwise, every season is good for different reasons. And here are some standouts from each.
When does the magic begin?
First up is Jack in Space, one of the earliest instances of them really digging into the science fiction aspects of the show, and it does it in a way that's totally intense but artistically whimsical. Then, Jack and the Three Blind Archers is excellent on so many levels. Such a great obstacle, Jack having to learn to be in tune with all his senses, and the sequence of him visualizing a winter wonderland while blindfolded is ASMR for the soul. The season 1 finale, Aku's Fairy Tales, is simply hilarious. The lengths he goes to make Jack the bad guy in his stories shows you exactly how mad he is at him, but still willing to paint him in a goofy light. Jack and the Ultra Robots is loosely based on 300, and yeah, it is insanely violent and hopeless. But that's what makes it work so well. It's got some of the classic run's most intense and satisfying action, and I couldn't have it any other way. Season 2 also has a great finale with Jack's Shoes, which is mostly a long routine of Jack trying out new shoes after his old sandals break, but then he finds a family that's secretly rooting for him and they make him a new pair, which is such a sweet scene. Jack and the Rave admittedly can feel like it's trying too hard to relate to early 2000s youth culture, but it makes up for that by being so well animated. The colors and dancing go together blissfully. Couple on a Train then does something I didn't entirely need, introduce a bickering divorced couple that both want to kill Jack separately. But it's such a fun story, and the fight on top of the train is a joy to watch. In contrast, Jack and the Zombies is another one of the show's darkest tales, with Jack being stuck in a cemetery, and if that wasn't taxing enough, he then has to fight Aku in one of their most memorable battles. Then we get to Jack, the Monks, and Ancient Master's son, where that tree guy I was talking about earlier appears. It's also super fun seeing Jack and these monks climbing this high mountain while being ambushed. It makes for a suspenseful tale. Dang, 3 great finales in a row. Jack in the Labyrinth isn't as ancient as it sounds. It's about him and this new age hacker being stuck in a high security maze. Above all the staging and atmosphere, this is the ultimate episode for anyone whose favorite color is blue. Moving on to season 4, Samurai vs. Samurai has Jack face another foe, an abrasive egomaniac who calls himself Da Samurai, who is such an entertaining foil to Jack, being a direct contrast to him profile-wise, tooting his own horn about how great he is with the sword. That makes it all the more satisfying when he gets the sense beaten into him by the end and becomes more humble. My favourite episode with the Scotsman's gotta be the 2-parter The Scotsman Saves Jack, where he has to be the heroic one after Jack gets amnesia, and it goes to show just how much he values Jack as a friend. One confrontation with some sirens later, and Jack gets his memory back. He and the Scotsman just hang out on the beach for a couple minutes. It may be filler, but it's happy feel-good filler. But that's got nothing on my favourite episode, Jack vs. Aku, where Aku finally just wants to battle Jack man to man without any trickery. Spoiler alert, there is some trickery. It is all just incredibly funny, but it doesn't sacrifice any time they spend on action and suspense. If you're into cartoonier cartoons, this is one of the first episodes you should watch. It's fantastic. But I should make it clear that this is all just my opinion, and that everyone has certain episodes that speak to them, and that's beautiful. And I'll have to crack on some of them.
There's no magic, is there?
Jack and the Warrior Woman has him hanging around with this green and black chick for a little too long to take seriously. I don't really feel sad when she's revealed to be Aku, I'm just happy Jack can stop being an idiot. Jack and the Lava Monster I just found to be pretty average. The design of the battlefield is nice, but I think the battle's too long to stay invested in, and while the guy inside the monster going to heaven's a nice ending, it comes out of left field after such a long drawn-out fight. Jack Tales is the first anthology episode, and they botched it! I just found the 2 serpent siblings to be an annoying waste of time, and the metal-eating family to be dark, but without a real purpose. At least I found the last one, where Jack has to save a fairy from a troll, to be fine, I guess. Jack and the Fighting Dragon is an episode that I have trouble remembering exists. I think that the Fantastic Voyage angle's pretty nice and provides some delightfully surreal animation, but otherwise, it's embarrassing for me to watch. I'm sure you'd like it if you were more tolerant of fart jokes. Moving on to another comedy episode, Jack is Naked, which is a bit too weird for my liking. But I will give it this, I still remember that random fairy that only shows up for a few seconds. That's something, I guess. Okay, one last comedy episode I put in my not my thing category. Jack and the Annoying Creature. Said creature can be cute and it can be annoying, but that's about all I got for most of this episode. It's standing up for Jack is nice, and I think it says a lot about this show and even my least favorite genre of episodes, have nice things I like about them. Then season 4 comes around and makes otherwise good episodes incredibly slow, like Robo Samurai vs the Mondo Bot. I understand that with a giant robot battle you've got to make them slow and heavy, but it makes for the show's second most boring battle. The most boring coming from my least favourite episode, The Princess and the Bounty Hunters, which introduces some admittedly stock characters who want to catch Jack, then it stuffs them in the snow to wait for him to come around for 2 whole minutes. I'm all for a nice atmospheric sequence, but this was 10% of the episode that they could have cut down or changed to something more dramatic. Last of all for weaker links is Jack and the Baby, where Jack's story he tells to a lost baby is pretty nice all things considered, but it can't save how annoying the baby's crying is. Again, I should stress most of these episodes are interesting and well-made pieces of art, but I do have to point out the stuff that isn't hitting the right notes for me. But regardless of personal opinions, Samurai Jack was a really good show that had a short but impactful run. Until 2017. That year, Genndy Tartakosvky was able to revive Samurai Jack for a 5th season on Adult Swim, Cartoon Network's nighttime block. In doing so, he made it edgier and more intense for an adult audience. After all, the kids who grew up on the original show were now in their 20s, so now was as good a time as any to bring some closure to Jack's journey. Of course, there was a comic book series a couple years prior published by IDW, but nobody cares about comics anymore. And I'll have to put up a violence warning since this season was TV-14, and a spoiler warning because it's only 2 years old. In general, I typically review shows that have been over for at least a decade, since they're a part of TV history at that point, and don't need spoiler warnings, but this is a special case. It's been 50 years since Jack wound up in the future, and he's lost his sword and all hope in going back to the past. Even Aku's gotten bored of failing to kill him, as his immortality given to him by the time portal makes it impossible. Suddenly, Jack comes into contact with a cult of women that were born to kill him and gets stuck with one of the women, Ashi, after the ordeal. Ashi then slowly learns that Jack has actually done a lot of good for the world and decides to save him from his inner demon who's constantly telling him to give up and end his life. After some spiritual mumbo-jumbo where Jack finds the sword inside himself and reverts back to his classic model, he and Ashi hit it off, going on a few more adventures, but then getting stopped by Aku, who thanks to his robot minion Scaramouche, thought Jack had lost his sword, but after capturing Jack and reminding Ashi she's his own daughter and turning her against Jack, at least physically, all the friends Jack made along the way come back for an epic battle against Aku. Jack then reminds Ashi that if she's Aku's daughter and has his powers, then she can create a portal back to the past and finally kill Aku there. That happens. But then Ashi disappears because she came from what is now a non-existent future. That's a lot to digest, and I've got to say, most of it works. I'm happy they were able to put in some more adult themes like cults and suicide, and it's great that they work in the context of the show's world. It's also surprising to see the violence be actual violence with tons of blood. It's nothing that'd make me feel sick, and I get sick pretty easily with gore, so it's totally in my comfort zone as far as action goes. Jack and Aku, though more warped by the passage of time, are as reliable characters as ever, even though they had to change Aku's voice, and the Scotsman's still around in spirit. But we've also got some new characters, including Scaramouche, one of Aku's most trusted robot minions. He's excellent as comic relief, given the revival's heavier nature, and he's also got the best line of the season, so there's that. Ashi's a more complicated story. While I don't dislike her, I feel her and Jack falling in love's shoehorned in pretty wonkily. It's not that I mind romance, but there's hardly any reason they should decide to fall in love. So when Ashi disappears at the very end, I'm more sad about how the whole future's vanished than about her specifically. But putting her aside, I think that the bittersweet ending makes a lot of sense for this show. Jack was constantly sacrificing his own needs for the good of others, and this is the ultimate display of his selflessness, saving his own family and era from Aku, and ensuring them, and himself, a brighter way forward. And that's Samurai Jack. I can pick apart the 500 things that work about it and the 5 things that don't all day if I wanted to, but I still want to give you your own say in the matter. This is a show that brings out lots of awe, and that can't be denied. From its small cast of complex characters to its engrossing art style, action and themes, this is destined to be a part of TV history. I highly recommend it to anyone who's a fan of Western takes on Asian culture or fantasy action, which has a wide audience these days to put it lightly. I must go now. I need to check how that cul-de-sac is doing. Goodbye for now.